Hello, I'm Gladys Abdoul. I'm a lecturer of literature and academic writing from the University of Antananarivo. My presentation today will explore the imagined and the seen, making meaning and creating reality through reader response across medium transposition. As a starter, I will talk briefly about Jane Eyre, the novel I used as a major focus for this talk. Jane Eyre is an English novel published in 1847 by Charlotte Brontë under the pen name Bell. Though not so well received at the time, it has risen to become one of the most impacting texts in English throughout the times due to its novelty and the writer's unquestioned talent. It is one of the most translated texts in English, over 10 languages, and the most adapted, over 70 adaptations that ranges from silent films, feature films, radio and TV, theater, sequels, prequels, spin-offs, and lots of tellings and retellings. On the cover of the first publication of the novel, we only see solemn and sober words with the mention autobiography, along with the volume number, the author, and the publisher. For its reprint in 1985, the cover has slightly changed. In its Penguin Classics edition, there is the picture of the author and her real name. When looking at the two covers, however, the contrast is not much. Both are quite solemn and sober, despite the added image, as if indicating the nature of the book's content. In these sample graphic novels, the graphic characteristics of the text and images are clearly put forward, in contrast with the other versions where the story's closeness to a fairy tale is more stressed. Although the novel is considered as a coming-of-age narrative, its unrealistic note seems to be accepted as a general fact within all adaptations. My first encounter with Jane Eyre was at the age of 13 with a graphic narrative from a literary magazine produced by the Malagasy Ministry of Education for local secondary schools. It was the mid-1990s. It was a weekly episode that young me was eager to devour. The presence of both text and images greatly helped in my understanding of the story and contributed in my attachment to the main character. Even years later, as I reread the text in its original form, that is the novel in English, I greatly appreciated the author's storytelling talent, but the images that came to my mind are very close to the ones I have seen in the graphic narrative. Nothing equaled meeting that young girl from those pages. The drawing's perfect details fitted in with the words of the text and remained imprinted inside my memory for years as a fantastic world of possibilities, a subversive reality covering the pale and dryness of the world around. The taciturn face, the strong-headed character, the hot temper, but also the courage and the determination of such a young and unlucky being in the face of her fate. All of this landed an authentic aura to her character and made her attaching and touching. She was neither beautiful nor having a glossy faces like one of those movie actresses, or shallow and smoky like the cartoon figures. It was so easy to relate to her person, though her word was quite foreign to me. Here, the first representation of Jane Eyre is an image from the cover of an illustrated paper of 2021. The picture is flawless, glossy, glamorous, showing the independent, intellectual and spirited woman that we are also seeing in the text extract, one of Jane's most quoted depictions of herself. Do you think because I'm poor, obscure, plain and little, I'm soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you, and full as much heart. I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. The drawing, on the other hand, is closer to what I had in mind because that's what I have seen. It shows a lonely and almost dark Jane, which probably fits in more with the melodrama of the story. If you look at these pictures from Jane Eyre movies, most actresses who incarnated her have the same profile in terms of physical appearances. All in all, they seem to seek to represent this melancholic strike and less of a strong will that the text has exhorted, leaving one with the impression that maybe what I had imagined isn't necessarily what was in the text. Both images and words can have tremendous effect on a reader. The effect of ink on paper, especially on a young mind, translates the poetic expression of images and words in meaning-making, while creating an alternative reality for the imagination. The interplay surely explains the imposition of visual arts upon literary creation in the last decades. In his article advocating the use of visual components to foster literary reading in reluctant learners, Jeffrey Willem evokes how the use of visual arts generates the creation of symbolic story representations, which in turn will help the reader-learner to see what they were reading, but also to make other response moves involving emotional effect, connecting their whole life to the literary experience, and the consideration of significance. If we compare the effects of visuals and words on the reader's mind, the visual tends to be more alluring due to its colorful presentation, the ludic appearance, and the promises for more fun and entertainment in terms of emotional responses, whereas words are more serious-looking, challenging, and promises new challenge and new knowledge, and information that will yield more in terms of intellectual satisfaction. Hence, it's up to each reader to seek what they need or are after from the reading experience. Moreover, in terms of communication, it has been proven that images combined with spoken words are more effective compared to words alone or images alone. The change in genre and medium does not imply loss in meaning. On the contrary, it brings new possibilities, the creation of a new reality from the same story. In a sense, visual arts are an integrated part of the expanding world of literary production. Feel this within, convinced that as readers get to meet the same story in different format, they will be able to make new connections with the text and enrich their personal understandings. Just like a few years ago, the world could discover masterpieces from different cultures and traditions, and to enjoy their beauty due to the expansion of literary translation. Translation allowed access into varying language systems and word cultures: Arabic, Russian, Chinese, European, African, and so on. The same phenomenon is happening with the expansion of visual arts, but instead of languages, we are transposing words and images. In her introduction to intertextuality as an enriched experience of responding to a given text, Landwehr Margaret talks of a multiplicity of ways of viewing reality. Hence, coming back to interpretation as a form of meaning-making and creation of realities based on the text, stressing out the relativity of every system. Given the advent in technology, visual arts have become incontournable for modern readers. A younger generation of readers, learners, literary and artistic consumers are driven towards visual arts and are shunning simple texts. When asked to read a long novel, which for them means more than 50 pages, my students will say words without images are too bland. With the rise of social media and the facility of taking pictures and uploading them, making selfies and so on, images have become an integrated part of our multimodal world, part of how we interpret and tell this world. Images, as much as words, have become a lens through which we create realities and tell our stories. According to Jordan Robert and Dishiko Michael from their 2012 article, visual arts combined to text provides an added dimension which strengthens readers' performance, especially in literature and reading classrooms. Indeed, visual art in its variety of formats, genres and styles provides a reality which is accessible and thus manages to get closer to the reader consumer by providing customized products. If we take as an example the scene of the Red Room in chapter 2, looking at the images, the mind imprints details that may not necessarily be present in the written narrative. The reader-viewer takes scene as the scene part. The first impressions left by details such as the deep fear and resignation on Jane's face, the expression of her eyes to reflect the glittering fear, her general posture and words, the sound effects. All of these details will inform the interpretation and infer meaning-making on the imagined part, which is here her injured sense of self at being treated so unjustly. These details too, however, are the results of the artist's creations that have been added to the writer's words and are interfering with the reader-viewer's responses. Subtle details such as how thick or thin the line strokes on a person's face are, the wallpaper's motif, what color shades a background scenery would be given, the lighting, may be present on a screen or within a comic's frame but are hard to express with words on paper. Despite the writer's exquisite choice of wording, the Red Room is depicted as a place that's dark and cold, using words such as chill, gloom, silent. There is also Brontë's description of Jane's face reflected in a mirror that she cannot recognize as her own, and which is likened to that of a tiny phantom, half fairy, half imp. The writer's literary creation has been transformed, positively or negatively, by the artistic interpretation of the artists that worked on the medium change or transposition. The drawer, the graphic designer, the movie director, and so on. And the emotional and intellectual responses of the reader-viewer or the reader-consumer will inevitably reflect those transformations. There is an interplay of meanings that affect the responses to the narrative based on the choice of medium for the storytelling, going beyond simple technicity and literary interpretation or artistic expressions. In sum, responding to and interpreting a text remains a very personal and contextualized experience. For me, my long relationship with Jane Eyre came from a series of elements coming together to form a given space and reality. A reality which keeps evolving as I go back to the text and have diverging experiences of reading and responding to it. However, my interpretation tends to remain stable, despite variations and fluctuations in external factors. The medium in which the text comes to me, the place where I am, my need to read, my age and lived experiences, and so on. Moreover, the dynamic between visuals and words also keeps evolving along with technology, following the trend in the literary market, the publishing industry, and the world of entertainment. When I read the graphic narrative of Jane Eyre, the Japanese manga was a newly implanted genre that has pushed the comics as a developing literary subgenre. Whereas when I read the novel, I was already exposing my role as a university student majoring in literature, and who found more interest and attraction in words, mainly imagery and play on words. They have become captivating because more rewarding in contrast to drawings and illustrations. Besides, given the influence of personal interpretation from the artists who adapt or retell a given text, one can sometimes feel cheated out of some touching and emotional details from the original text. This might be the origin of this sense of getting meaning as a second-hand reality. However, the experience of reading itself is a way for the reader's imagination to create meanings and build realities according to his or her understanding. Regardless of the medium, one interprets what one hears and sees, which may be very different from what the author had in mind upon creating the work. Reading is and remains a very personal experience, which cannot be either commodified or standardized. Thus closes my presentation. Thank you for having me. Comments and questions are most welcome.